Every night at exactly 9 o'clock, a woman named Naledi Ocii walked past the old bus depot on her way home from her second job, and every night she saw the same man sitting against the same cracked wall, wrapped in a blanket that had more holes than fabric. She didn't know his name yet, she only knew his eyes, tired but never empty. Tonight, it was raining. Naledi stopped walking. She stood under her umbrella for a long moment, watching the man shiver, watching people step around him like he was a puddle instead of a person. Then she did something she had never let herself do before. She crossed the street. "You'll catch your death out here," she said, crouching down so she wasn't standing over him. "Come with me, just for tonight." The man looked up, startled, as if kindness itself had surprised him more than the rain. "I don't want your pity," he said quietly. "Good," Naledi answered. "Because I'm not offering pity. I'm offering soup." That made him almost smile. To understand why Naledi did what she did, you have to understand who she was. She was 29 years old, a nurse's aide at the community clinic by day and a late-night cleaner at an office building by night, saving every spare coin toward nursing school. Her father had died when she was 16, and her mother, Adiz, had raised her and her younger brother Kwame on faith, discipline, and very little else. Naledi had grown up poor enough to know exactly what it felt like to be looked at like a burden. She had promised herself, back when she was a girl standing in a food line with her mother while strangers whispered, that if she ever had even a little more than nothing, she would never let another person go hungry in front of her without at least offering a hand. So when she saw the man in the rain, she wasn't performing kindness. She was simply becoming, once again, exactly who she had always decided to be. His name, he told her over a bowl of reheated stew in her tiny one-room flat, was Tobias. He didn't offer a last name, and she didn't push. "How long have you been on the street?" she asked. "Long enough to know most people's true faces," he said. "You'd be surprised how quickly a smile disappears once someone realizes you have nothing to give them in return." "I don't need anything from you," Naledi said simply. "I just didn't want you to freeze." He studied her for a long moment, really studied her, the way a man studies something he's trying to memorize. "You say that like it's obvious," he murmured. "For most people, it isn't." What Naledi did not know, what almost no one in the city knew, was that the man eating stew at her chipped kitchen table controlled more wealth than the entire district she lived in. Tobias Whitfield was the reclusive founder of Ironbridge Holdings, a man whose name appeared in financial headlines but whose face appeared almost nowhere, because he had spent the last decade guarding his privacy like a locked vault. 3 weeks earlier, exhausted by boardrooms full of people who agreed with him only because he signed their paychecks, Tobias had walked out of his own headquarters, left his phone with his assistant, and disappeared into the city wearing donated clothes and 3 weeks of stubble. He told himself it was research. In his heart, he knew it was something closer to loneliness. A hunger to be seen as a man instead of a fortune. He hadn't expected to be seen at all. Certainly not like this. Naledi let him sleep on her small couch that night, and when morning came, she expected him to be gone. He wasn't. "I don't have anywhere else to go," he admitted, and for the first time, it wasn't entirely a lie. Against every warning her mother would have given her, Naledi let him stay one more night. Then another. She gave him one of her late father's old jackets. She showed him where the shelter down the road served breakfast, in case he needed somewhere to go during the day while she worked. She never once asked him to prove he deserved her help. Slowly, without either of them announcing it, one more night became weeks. Tobias began doing small things around her flat, fixing a cabinet hinge, patching a leak under the sink with materials he bought from selling a little of the loose collection money he still had in his coat pocket. Naledi noticed his hands were rough now, but his sentences weren't. He spoke like someone educated, someone who had read more books than his circumstances suggested. She wondered about that sometimes, but never asked directly. She had learned, growing up, that everyone's hardest chapters were their own to share when they were ready. One evening, as she stitched a tear in her uniform by lamplight, Tobias watched her for a long time before speaking. "Why do you keep helping me?" he asked. "You have almost nothing yourself." Naledi didn't look up from her sewing. "Almost nothing is not the same as nothing," she said. "And helping you doesn't cost me who I am. It costs me a little soup and a couch. That's not sacrifice, Tobias. That's just being a person." He sat with that for a long time after she'd gone to sleep. Naledi's younger brother, Kwame, was 17 and still finishing school, sharp-tongued in the way teenage boys are when they're scared of losing the only stability they've ever known. He came by the flat one afternoon to drop off a textbook their mother had borrowed, and he found Tobias at the kitchen table, patching the sole of an old shoe with a needle and thread. "Who's this?" Kwame asked, dropping his bag with a thud, suspicion written plainly across his face. "A friend of your sister's," Tobias said simply, not looking up from his stitching. "Staying here for a while. We don't have room for strangers. We barely have room for us." "Kwame," Naledi warned from the doorway, but Tobias raised a hand gently, asking her to let him answer. "You're right to be careful," Tobias told the boy. "A house with two people who work themselves half to death for every coin doesn't need a third mouth eating for free. I clean, I fix what's broken, I don't touch what isn't mine. If that's not enough, tell me, and I'll go." Kwame studied him for a long moment, the way boys do when they're deciding whether to trust an adult's word or their own instincts. Finally, he sat down across the table. "You're doing that shoe wrong," he said. "The stitch pulls loose if you don't double it at the toe." Tobias handed him the needle without argument, and for the next hour, a 17-year-old boy taught a billionaire how to properly mend a shoe. It became, without either of them planning it, one of the steadiest friendships in the house, Kwame stopping by more often than his textbook errands required, Tobias asking him about school, about the engineering course he dreamed of but assumed he'd never afford. Neither of them knew, in those quiet afternoons, how much that friendship would matter later. But then something unexpected happened. Naledi's mother, Adizi, came to visit unannounced one Sunday and found a strange man sweeping her daughter's floor. "Who is this?" Adizi asked, alarm sharpening her voice. "Mama, this is Tobias. He's been staying with me." "Staying with you? Naledi, do you know this man? Do you know his family, his story, anything? I know he's kind. I know he's honest. That's enough for now." Adizi pulled her daughter into the hallway, voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "You are a good girl with a good heart, and good hearts get taken advantage of. Look at him. He has nothing. What happens when you fall for a man who has nothing to offer you but more nothing? Then I'll have chosen someone honest over someone rich and cruel," Naledi said. "I've seen both, Mama. I know which one keeps you warm at night." Her mother left angry, unconvinced, promising to return. Naledi cried a little after she left, not because her mother was wrong to worry, but because being doubted by the person who raised her stung more than she wanted to admit. Tobias found her sitting on the fire escape afterward, knees pulled to her chest. "I'm sorry," he said. "I've made things harder for you." "You didn't make anything harder," Naledi said. "The world already had opinions about people like you long before you showed up in my kitchen." "People like me," he repeated softly, and something in his chest twisted with a guilt she couldn't yet understand. What happened next changed everything. Tobias's assistant, a sharp, loyal woman named Priscilla who had worked for him for 11 years, finally tracked him down after weeks of quiet searching, not through police or private investigators, but through something far simpler. She had asked every shelter and soup kitchen in the city to watch for a man matching his description, and a volunteer at the corner shelter remembered a stranger who'd started walking there every morning with a woman in nurse's scrubs. Priscilla arrived at Naletti's building in a plain rental car, dressed down deliberately, and knocked on the door with a folder under her arm. "Sir," she said the moment Tobias opened the door, relief and frustration warring on her face. "The board thinks you're dead. I have spent 3 weeks not sleeping." Naledi went very still. "Sir," she repeated. Tobias closed his eyes briefly, the moment he'd been dreading finally arriving. "Naledi," he said quietly, "there's something I need to tell you, and I need you to let me finish before you say anything." He told her everything. Ironbridge Holdings, the boardrooms. The wealth that could have bought her entire street twice over. The disguise that had started as research and become something he never expected, a way of finally knowing, without any doubt, that someone cared about him and not his money. Naledi sat down slowly on the arm of her worn couch, the same couch he'd slept on for weeks, and said nothing for a long time. "You lied to me," she finally said. "I never lied about who I am when I'm with you," Tobias said. "I lied about what I own. There's a difference, even if it doesn't feel like one right now. You let my mother think you were nothing. You let me think you had no one. I let you treat me like a person instead of a headline," he said, voice breaking slightly. "For the first time in 10 years, someone looked at me and saw me, not my company, not my money, not what I could give them. I'm sorry for the deception. I'm not sorry for what it showed me." Naledi asked him to leave that night. Not out of hatred, out of the need to breathe, to understand what had actually happened to her over the past month, and whether any of it had been real. For 2 weeks, she didn't answer his calls, made through Priscilla's phone since his own had been switched off for a decade of secrecy, apparently, or so it felt. She went to work. She went home. She stared at the couch and remembered a man learning to fix a cabinet hinge with borrowed tools, and she cried more than she expected to for someone she'd known such a short time. Her mother, strangely, was the one who softened first. "I looked him up," Adiz admitted one evening, sitting across from her daughter with 2 cups of tea. "Everything he told you was true. Ironbridge. The company. All of it. That doesn't make the lying hurt less, Mama." "No," her mother agreed. "But I also read an interview from years ago, before he disappeared from public life. A reporter asked him what he feared most, and he said he feared never knowing whether anyone in his life loved him or his money. Naledi, that man built walls because people kept trying to climb over them for what he had. And then he met a woman who never once asked him for anything." Naledi turned her cup slowly in her hands. "I didn't fall for a fortune, Mama. I fell for a man who fixed a leaky sink and listened when I talked about nursing school like it mattered. I don't know how to feel about the rest." "Then don't decide based on the money," her mother said. "Decide based on the man you actually met. The money is just noise around him now. It was always noise. You already knew who he was before you knew what he had." The real surprise came later, and it wasn't the kind either of them expected. Naledi went to the address Priscilla had given her, an office building with a lobby taller than her entire apartment block, not for reconciliation, but for something she needed to see with her own eyes before she could decide anything. Tobias was in a glass-walled office reviewing figures with 3 tired-looking executives, and for a moment she almost turned around, certain she didn't belong there. Then she saw something that stopped her. Taped to the corner of his monitor, half hidden behind a stack of files, was a small folded piece of paper. It was a grocery list, in her handwriting, from the second week he'd stayed with her. Milk. Rice. Onions. Thread for mending. He had kept it. He looked up and saw her standing in the doorway, and every executive in that room watched the richest man most of them had ever worked for go completely silent. "I kept it," he said, following her eyes to the note. "Because it's the only thing I own that no one gave me because of who I am. You gave it to me because you needed onions and thought I might be walking that way anyway." "I was going to ask you to buy the onions," Naledi admitted, and despite everything, she almost laughed. "I bought the onions," he said. "I also apparently kept the list for 2 months like a sentimental fool." The executives quietly excused themselves without being asked twice. They talked for hours that day, not about wealth, not about companies, but about the weeks that had actually mattered: the stew, the fire escape, the fixed hinge, her mother's fear, his own decade of loneliness dressed up as success. Tobias didn't ask her to forgive the lie by pointing to his fortune. He asked her to forgive it by showing her, plainly, that the fortune had never been what he wanted her to love. "I'm not offering you a rich man's apology," he told her. "Cars and gifts and grand gestures. I'm offering you the truth, late, but complete. And I'm asking if there's still room for someone who wants to spend the rest of his life earning back the trust he broke. One honest day at a time." Naledi thought of her father, who had died with almost nothing but had never once let her go without kindness. She thought of the man on the couch mending a hinge for a woman he'd only just met, expecting nothing in return. "I'm not marrying Ironbridge Holdings," she finally said. "If we do this, you fix your own hinges. You still learn to cook badly beside me on Sundays. You stay the man who kept a grocery list, not the one on magazine covers." "I can live with that," Tobias said, and for the first time in years, he meant every word without calculating a single thing behind it. Months later, at a small wedding that made no headlines because Tobias insisted on it staying that way, Naledi's mother stood and raised a toast with tears in her eyes. "I doubted a man because he had nothing," Adazi said to the small gathering of neighbors, co-workers, and Priscilla, who cried harder than anyone. "I want the whole world to know. I was wrong to measure a person by what's in their pockets instead of what's in their hands and their heart. My daughter taught me that. I hope I never forget it again." Naledi squeezed Tobias's hand under the table, and for once, the richest man in the room felt like the luckiest one, too. Kwame stood to speak next, clearly nervous in a borrowed suit jacket that didn't quite fit his growing shoulders. "Tobias taught me to mend a shoe before I knew he could have bought me 1,000 pairs, he said, drawing a soft laugh from the room. "He's already helped me apply for an engineering scholarship, and he made me promise I'd earn my place on my own merit, not his money. I think that tells you everything you need to know about the man my sister married. He didn't come into this family to buy us, he came to belong to us." Later that night, after the guests had gone and the small string lights over the courtyard had been switched off one by one, Naledi found Tobias sitting on the back step, looking up at a sky full of stars neither of them could have afforded to see clearly from the city center years ago. "Any regrets?" she asked, sitting beside him. "Only one," he said. "That I spent 10 years thinking I had to hide everything I owned to find someone who wanted nothing from me. You would have loved me the same on day one, penniless or not. I just needed the courage to test it. And you never once made me feel foolish for needing that test." "I'm not sure I forgive the lie completely," Naledi admitted honestly. "But I understand the fear underneath it now. And I choose you anyway, not the company, not the name in the papers. The man who fixed my sink and kept a grocery list like it was gold. Then I'll spend the rest of my life making sure that's the only version of me you ever have to choose," Tobias said. Somewhere behind them, through the kitchen window, Adazi watched her daughter lean her head against her new husband's shoulder, and for the first time since her own husband had died, she let herself believe that the world still occasionally rewarded a good heart with exactly the love it deserved.